and welcome to my ranking of the my top 10 Doctor Who stories from the 1970s. So I'll be looking at every story between Spearhead from Space, 1970, to The Haunt of Nyman, 1979 to 1980, for this list. Now, Haunt of Nyman will qualify for both 1970s and 1980s lists due to having 2 episodes in 1979 and 2 in 1980. I can safely say that that story will not be appearing on either list, but it is eligible, as I explained at the end of the review, along with a couple of other examples. So that's the rules. If a story is partly in a decade and partly in the next decade, then it's eligible for both lists. Example, Haunt of Nymon, The End of Time, or any Series 12 stuff that is going to take place in 2019 and 20. Possibly, if that does happen, it's speculation at this point. Also, this video is coming out during the Haunt of Nyman's video, due to the fact that it transitions decade halfway through that story. So this video, now that with that review more than 15 minutes, this video can come out 15 minutes in the next quarter hourly scheduled section on YouTube, as you've got those. And someone's car alarm just bleeped. That was what you may have heard if you heard that in the background. Okay, and this video is also being done before the Sharda review, because that is a 1980s story, and that will be followed by the season 17 ranking. The Fourth Doctor's ranking will be following season 18, by the way, so if you're wondering that. By the way, this ranking will have major spoilers for that Fourth Doctor ranking that will be coming out after season 18. So, if you're watching this video after that season has come out, the Fourth Doctor ranking has come out, then go and check that out first, and then come back. If you're watching this before then, you're okay to watch it, carry on watching, but there will be strong spoilers. If not, then you'll just have to wait a week. But that's okay, I'm sure you'll be okay with that. And then after you've watched that video, come back here to watch my rank of the stories. And this will be the same going through with 10th Doctor, when I'll be ranking the mid to late 2000 and 2000 stories, and then the 10th Doctor ranking will be after that. So the mid to late 2000s ranking will contain major spoilers for the 10th Doctor ranking, and the same for the 13th if there's as well, with the 2010s ranking at the end of the decade, and if that has any, that might have some spoilers for a future 13th Doctor ranking in the future, plus also ones for the Wilderness Years. The 60s and 80s ones don't have to worry as much, because those Doctors' eras technically ended by those points. I mean, yeah, 7 did sort of technically continue until the TV movie, but not officially, apart from Dimensions in Time, arguably. And the first act of the movie. But besides those, technically ended in 89. Although I consider it up to 96, but story-wise, besides Dimensions in Time, then the end of the 80s, yeah. Hence why those decade rankings will follow those the 2nd and 7th Doctor story rankings. Okay, so with those rules out the way, and with less hassle than at the end of the Haunt of Nyman review, let's get down to the 1970s ranking. And pretty much every story from Spearhead from Space to the Haunt of Nyman are eligible for this ranking. So that's all of season 7, all of season 8, all of season 9, all of season 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, apart from Sharda, which was technically not broadcast. So you could say the whole of season 17 minus the last 2 episodes of Haunt of Nyman plus Sharda. So pretty much everything up. So pretty much all of season 17 up to the first half of the Haunt of Nyman. But Haunt of Nyman's not going to be on this list anyway, so don't worry. Okay, before we also start, here are some honourable and dishonourable mentions from each Doctor who's appeared in this decade. And this decade, like the 60s, only featured 2 Doctors, the 3rd and the 4th Doctors. And so their honourable and dishonourable mentions. For the 3rd Doctor, the honourable mention goes to The Mind of Evil from season 8. And the dishonourable mention goes to Colony in Space, also from season 8. For the Fourth Doctor, the honourable mention goes to the android invasion from season 13. I was about to say 12 for some reason. And the dishonourable mention also goes to another season 13 story. Wow, the honourable and dishonourable mentions are coming from the same seasons, aren't they? And this one is Planet of Evil. Yeah, with Colony in Space and Planet of Evil, those are my least favourite third and fourth Doctor stories, respectively. Whilst the honourable mentions are two stories from those Doctor's eras that didn't quite make the list. In fact, whilst Android Invasion was closer to being on the list than Mind of Evil, because of the stories on the list itself, Android didn't quite make it to the cut. Whilst Mind of Evil was quite of a distance from joining the list, it was the next best third Doctor in my story, in my opinion. Hence, it's being my third Doctor honourable mention. And I will also say now, most of the Doctor stories on this ranking are fourth Doctor stories, hence spoilers, major spoilers for the fourth Doctor ranking that's yet to come. So, if you haven't seen that, but it's out and you want to go and watch it, or you want to wait a week and come back after this, after you've seen that, then do so now. Otherwise, we will get started. The honourable and dishonourable mentions doesn't seem to be that much of a much spoilery, but now we're going to get onto the list properly. Okay, starting off with number 10. This is a hugely popular story from the Fourth Doctor's era. It is from season 14, and yeah, it's a great story. It is The Talons of Wang Chiang. Now, apart from a few racial uncertainties, a few potential issues with it, and some unrealistic giant rats, it's a great story, a great mystery, great gothic horror, a great pseudo-historical technically, with some nice sci-fi fantasy elements in it. And it's really well written. I think it's had a great... Magnus Crew is a great villain. Lee Sun Chang is also a pretty good villain, as is Sin. Yeah, it says Jaeger and Lightfoot are two of the best characters of the supporting characters of the show. And I like how the Doctor is teaching Leela how her ancestors used to live. And it's nice to see him in a different costume instead of his usual. It's a nice little change. And I think Robert Holmes delivers on another great script. And it's a great way for season 14 to close. So, The Talons of Wang Chiang. I don't love it as much as the majority of people, but I certainly love it. My disc keeps falling down. Okay, on to number 9. Number 9 is a third Doctor story. And it's one of his stronger ones. From season 7, another season finale, Inferno. Now, this one I liked more on a rewatch than I did originally, because I didn't quite enjoy it on the first viewing, but the second viewing, I liked the story more. I thought it was a great story, a bit of very dramatic, and some great sci-fi elements into it as well, with the parallel universe and the Doctor travelling to it, and how he has to stop the people in our universe from causing the same problems. So it's got some great stuff. My only issue is that it's a bit too long. I think it could have been cut down to 5 or 6 episodes rather than 7. And I honestly could have said the same for Doctor and the Silurians and the Ambassadors of Death. They didn't. It does work at 7 parts, but honestly, all 3 stories could have been shorter. But they're better at this length than some stories are at other lengths. So I won't bash them too much. So I won't bash them too much for that. And I think Inferno does a really great job. So yeah, that's that one. Number 8, another Fourth Doctor story and another Android story. This one is a fun, entertaining story that highlights the better side of the Graham Williams era. From season 16, it is The Androids of Tara. If you saw the recent season 16 ranking, you'll know that this is my favourite story of that particular season, and it's one of my favourites of the Graham Williams era of the Fourth Doctor's era. I just think it's a very strong and entertaining story. and has a lot of great stuff going for it. Tom Baker and Mary Tam give great performances as the Doctor and Romana, and also Tam also plays Princess Strella and android versions of both characters. John Leeson is great as K9. They have some fantastic location work. Peter Jeffrey is one of the best supporting actors of the season. No, the best supporting actor of the season. One of the best of the show at the time. And also Grendel was his villain. Grendel was a great character, and it's just a fun, entertaining story, and it's a great mix of comedy and adventure, merged with some really great stuff. And I'm glad that the androids don't take over the story like Android Invasion sort of did, in a way, but then again, sort of not so much. They focused a bit more on their androids than androids of Tara, but I think androids of Tara, they're more concerned about the use of the androids rather than their existence. So yeah, that's Androids of Tara. I just really enjoyed it. Moving on to number 7, this is a more regarded classics from fans of the show. This one is a super brilliant, another gothic horror story, but this time merging historical events into historical lore with fantasy element, sort of sci-fi fantasy elements, and just works really great. And it is Pyramids of Mars from season 13. Yeah, all of season 13 stories were candidates for this list at one point or another, including Planet of Evil for the dishonourable mention. At this point, I think only this story has made it, but shows you how great that season was. The same can be said for the 4th Doctor ranking list, where we might see one or two more of them when we get there. Pyramids of Mars, just absolutely brilliant. More great supporting characters, villains and allies, with Sutek, Destroyer of Worlds, being a fantastic villain, and Gabriel Wolf gives a brilliant performance. The Scarmen brothers are also great villain and ally respectively, and I just love how most of the attention is, whilst it's Pyramids of Mars and it's an Egyptian lore, it's set at a country estate in the UK until they go to Mars, of course. But it's brilliant. It's really great and it's really entertaining. Okay, we've had 2 more 4th Doctor stories. I think it's time for a bit more 3rd Doctor now. For me, the 3rd Doctor didn't quite have as many 10 out of 10 stories as the 4th Doctor, which is why you got lots more 4th Doctor on this list, including some that didn't quite make the 70s cut, and maybe even 1 or 2 that might not even have made the 4th Doctor cut. We'll see when we get there. But certainly this number 6 spot is a generally a great example of a 3rd Doctor story, a great example of his era, I should say, before it even actually began. It is Spearhead from Space from season 7. Our first season opener of this ranking, and I think the only one? Yeah, the only season opener on this list. Making it the best season opener from the 1970s. And it was the first one. Ha! Nice one. Okay, Spearhead from Space. Fantastic start for the 3rd Doctor. Robert Holmes more than redeemed himself after the shitfest that was the Space Pirates, which was his previous story, and only 2 stories beforehand, with the fantastic war games in between, thank God. And now he's redeemed himself fully with Spearhead from Space. And yeah, this is a great way to start the 3rd Doctor's era, and it's a great example of the 3rd Doctor's era before it even began. Yeah, there'll be great examples of a story of that era later on. Might even 2 other 3rd Doctor stories on this list, maybe one from early and one that's coming up in a moment, may also be good examples. But Spearhead from Space is just a fantastic way to kickstart this era, and John Pertwee, literally, as soon as he gets into the role, he's off like a rocket. Same for Tom Baker when he starts, but I think Pertwee is a bit. I think with I think both Doctors of the 70s settled into their roles within an episode or 2, whilst Troughton and Hartnell Troughton took a few episodes to adjust. Hartnell took a few stories to adjust. That being said, with him, it was the first time the character was on screen, but it did take him a while to adjust to his character. Whilst the other Doctors, with a bit more of a responsibility, having to follow him, can adjust a bit easier throughout less time with less episodes by this point. By the time we get to Tom Baker, the actor is needing less episodes to adjust to the character, 1 or 2 as opposed to a couple of stories. So not only does Spearhead Space kickstart season 7 off with a bang, but it also kickstarts the third Doctor's era with a bang, and in fact the entirety of Doctor Who in the 1970s. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Moving on to number 5, which is my personal favourite third Doctor story from the following season, season 8. It is The Demons, or The Daemons. Now for this one, I just really enjoyed the most of Pertwee's stories. I found it's the best story, some of the best characters, some of the best acting. The only thing that lets it down is that this is probably where the third Doctor is the unkindest to Jo since her first appearance in Terror of the Autons. After that, I think this is his least kindest moments to Jo. Sometimes he can say a few things. When Ollie Page brought it up in his review, I was like, what does he mean? I mean, maybe the lines about the magic, maybe when he's talking about magic, but besides that, not sure what he means. But then I watched the story and like, okay, now I see what he means. So yeah, just some of that. But unlike with Ollie, it's not enough for me to knock it down from a 10 to a 9 out of 10. It's still my favourite third Doctor story. But it is enough to knock it down to not be my top 10 of all time ranking, which it took over from the movie, when the movie was removed from that list. But now it's gone down. Something else has got to change. It's got to take that position, and I think it might be one of the upcoming 70s stories here. If not, then maybe the 12th Doctor's finale. Not Twice Upon a Time Series 10's finale. But The Daemons is still a great story, and I highly recommend it. It's just that the third Doctor was at his unkindest to Jo since the Terror of the Autons. Thankfully, the development of both characters would kickstart in the next season. Just to clarify, there are no stories from season 9 on this ranking, and there's not any from 15 either. No stories from season 9 or 15, including as honourable or dishonourable mentions. There's no story from season 10 or 11 either, because there's only 3 third Doctor stories on this list. Okay, so the top 4 are now all 4th Doctor stories, and spoiler alert, these are also the top 4 stories of the 4th Doctor ranking as well. So the following top 4 are the top 4 stories of both the 1970s as a whole, as well as the 4th Doctor's ranking. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So, starting off with number 4. Number 4 is another highly popular story from season 14. And this story is the favourite story of my good friend and subscriber, Jack McCulloch. So he'll be happy to see this story very high on the list, even if it's not number 1. And that is, of course, The Deadly Assassin. So Jack's story is 4th on my list, which is still very high. And also, considering how many amazing stories there are during the 4th Doctor's era, this one is just one of the best of the best. It's not the best of the best of the best, but it's one of the best of the best. And it's just handled really well. I think the second half is a stronger half than the first half, but it's still a bloody brilliant story. Going to Gallifrey, the Master coming back. The politics is actually handled well for a change. The Time Lords are actually, despite the change in direction with their characters, they're actually done decently. And it's actually something Invasion of Time also did pretty well, to be honest. I was actually expecting that to not go down so well after I watched The Assassin again, but Invasion of Time also did it pretty well. Not as good, but also pretty well. And the stuff in The Matrix is just brilliant. And I think Bernard Hospital's best performance as one of his multiple recurring characters both on screen and in other expanded media. Again, he plays a character in another Big Finish story, Davros, the story that precedes Master, which I talked about in my Power of Troll review when talking about Philip Maddock. So Bernard Hartnell is another one of those actors who reappears in multiple Doctor Who stories and some audio stories. So certainly that audio, Davros. And as does Wendy Padbury, by the way. But I think his best performance is in Deadly Assassin, particularly in part 3 when he's hunting down the Doctor and then when he reveals himself and tries to kill the Doctor. Yeah, I can see why Mary Whitehouse got upset with that final scene, but I don't think it was something to get Philip Hinchcliffe fired over. I think it might have been an overreaction, but I can see where she was coming from. I mean, seeing your hero being drowned could cause younger children to have nightmares. This is why it's a PG-rated story, you know, guys. Strangely, Pyramids of Mars wasn't. Okay. That was a U for some reason. Yeah, that's a U, but the Ghost Monument is a 12. I think they should both be PG. But yeah, Deadly Assassin, brilliant story and an all-time classic. Number 3 is also an all-time classic. In fact, I would even say my top 4 are all all-time classics that the fans would, in some position or another, would be in their own top 10 rankings of either the decade or at least the Doctor that they're featuring. And number 3 is widely considered the best story of all time. It is, of course, Genesis of the Daleks from season 12. Now, for me, it is not the best story of all time. In fact, I still find it a bit overrated. Not as much as I used to, but it's still a bit overrated. And there are the occasional person that will say it's a bit too overrated, or just plain overrated. But I can see why those people who would claim it the best or one of the best stories of all time say so, because it is a bloody brilliant story. It is, the gothic horror feel is great, and also the violence in that story, unlike some later stories that we're going to have in classic and New Who stories, has context. There is it's war violence, and it's context to the story and the atmosphere that the season is creating. And Terry Nation also gives us a great new world building. He's able to make world building interesting and pretty scary in some places and pretty dark. Again, Mary Whitehouse took issue with this story, except the difference is there's context. And yeah, there was context in Deadly Assassin, but I can see where she was coming from. Whilst here, there's a bit more of a reason why, from a story building, world building point of view, as well as a storytelling. And I think it's handled brilliantly. Michael Wisher is fantastic as Davros, who is pretty much the star of the show, besides Tom Baker, of course. Elizabeth Sladen and Ian Sullivan also give fantastic performances. In fact, with Martyr, it might be his best performance of the show, with Tom Baker also giving one of his best performances and Sladen giving her one of her best performances. Maybe even the number 1 best performance, or at least for the classic series. Maybe the new series or the Sarah Jane Adventures she might do better, but certainly for classic series it could be her best performance, and certainly one of Baker's best. And I also love Peter Miles as Nyder. He's brilliant, a brilliant henchman. I do think it might be an episode or two too long, like Inferno, but both stories can be justified at those lengths, even if it could have been cut down a little bit. Alex Patterson of the Doctor Who Guide, actually, when he was talking about his 100 episode tag video, he said he would not include episode 5 because when he saw the edited version of the story, which you can find on the season 12 Blu-ray box set, he felt that the story moved a lot better without when it was cut down a little bit, and felt most of the stuff that episode 5 featured being removed was better. So that's hence why he chose to remove episode 5 from his tag video. And so yeah, so he's given us a good example of what could have been lost if the story could have been cut down to 4 or 5 episodes. But needless to say, that doesn't undermine the story, and Genesis of the Daleks proves, even converting me into a fan after all these years. I mean, I liked it, but I wasn't as big as a fan as everybody else, or nearly everybody else. But then rewatching it for these reviews converted me into a fan. Not as much as going all out and saying it's one of the best of all time, but certainly it's an outstanding classic. So there you go. Okay, moving on to number 2, also from season 12. This is another highly regarded story, not as much as Genesis, but it's a popular one. In fact, I think it's supposed to be the favourite of both Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat. And for me, it is my favourite of season 12, and it's one of the 2 stories on this list that does appear in my top 10 Doctor's stories ranking of all time. Sorry, Damons, you were for a bit, and then you went back out. But these top 2 stories are 2 of my all-time favourites, and number 2 is The Ark in Space. Robert Holmes' first story as script editor, and it's one of his own stories. Hey, if Terrance Dicks's final stories as script editor can be a story he wrote, if he was the script editor on Robot, then Robert Holmes can come in on a story as the script editor on a story that he writes, unless Robot was his first one. In which case, Dicks leaves on Planet of the Spiders, and Holmes starts with Robot, meaning that they don't leave or start on their own stories. But Ark in Space is just a magnificent story. It's a magnificent survival story. The first episode is a good example of one of those episodes that builds the mystery without having to be boring. It's a bit slow in places, but it's a good mystery builder. And then stuff kick-starts in the next episode and is handled really well across the rest of the story. Great supporting characters with great performances, great sets. Even if there's not any location work, it still looks pretty good. And yeah, it's a notable set. Yeah, it's notable models, but it's nice to play around with, and you can reuse the same sets without having the need to look repetitive, like with the Doctor's wife. And got a great villain with the Wirrin. I think they're better as a one-time off rather than a reoccurring villain, which seems to be a thing with Big Finish at the moment. They are reoccurring characters as much as the Nerva Beacon seems to be. But nevertheless, The Ark in Space is a fantastic and enjoyable story that, again, like Spearhead from Space, it's a great example of the Fourth Doctor's of stories of the Fourth Doctor's era, and the era has only just started. So yeah, I commend Robert Holmes for creating 2 great stories early on in the respected Doctors of this decade, and having great examples of stories from those Doctor's eras before the eras got started. And finally, number 1 from season 17, and one of the only story that I consider more better than mediocre in this season, if we disclude Sharda, which is a 1980s story anyway. But if that had been broadcast, and technically maybe a 2010 story, if you if saying the finished version came out in 2017. So in other words, just not a 1970s story. But excluding Sharda, my number 1 choice is the only not mediocre or worse story from that season, and it is of course City of Death. City of Death is brilliant. It is fun. It's engaging. It's smart. It's fun. It has amazing location work in fucking Paris. And supporting cast is amazing. The guy playing Duggan, the character's great. The actor's great. I keep forgetting his name, but it comes back to me. Julian Glover is amazing as Scaroff / Scarleone and the splinters of him. The Countess, Herman, the Professor, the Soldier, they're all great characters. And it's just a nice, simple plot. And it just works brilliantly. Add some great cameos from John Cleese and Eleanor, what was her surname? Eleanor something, down below. And you got a great story. My only disappointment is that K9 couldn't feature in it at all, but oh well, that I can let that slide. You get some great stuff to do in the other. He's one of the highlights of the other stories of the season, minus Destiny of the Daleks. So fair enough. And to be honest, City of Death already had a K9 replacement in the form of Duggan, probably wasn't intended to be that way, but he made up for the void left by that and just proved to be a fantastic character. Going as far as to say that he's one of the supporting characters who should have become a companion. Forget Adam Mitchell, Duggan should have been a companion. He certainly earned it by the time of the end of the story, and he could probably just punch baddies or monsters in the following stories. Yeah, he might have left in a later story, but certainly he would have been great for at least a season or something. And at the end of the day, City of Death is just a fun, entertaining, nice little sit down, something to put you in a good mood, and it's just a good story. And that's why I consider it the best story of the 1970s, because it's such an easy and enjoyable watch. And the story's awesome as well. So, that's it from my 1970s stories ranking, and I'll just go through the list again. Number 10 from season 14 is The Talents of Wang Chiang. Number 9 is Inferno from season 7. Number 8 is The Androids of Tara from season 16. Number 7 is The Pyramids of Mars from season 13. Number 6 is Spearhead from Space from season 7. Number 5 is The Daemons from season 8 and is the best third Doctor story on this list. Number 4 is The Deadly Assassin from season 14. Number 3 is Genesis of the Daleks from season 12. Number 2 is The Ark in Space from season 12. And number 1 is City of Death from season 17. So that's it from me. Thank you for watching. We're going to be returning to the regular Doctor Who reviews next time with Shada, followed by a season 17 ranking, and then we're on to season 18, which will be followed by its own ranking, and then the 4th Doctor ranking, and then finally we'll get on to the 5th Doctor. And by that time we'll be into the 80s. And the 1980s ranking will be coming up after the 7th Doctor's ranking, which will follow season 26 and its ranking, due to Dimensions in Time will be counted as an honourable mentions for the 7th Doctor, along with the movie. And we'll just talk about the stories from his era, then his ranking. For 6 and 7, they're going to be top 5 stories, same for 9, and top 5 moments for the 8th and more Doctors. And also 13 if Series 12 isn't out by the time we get to her ranking. Everybody else, it will be a top 10. Stories, and decades will be top 10 stories apart from the 90s and the early to mid 2000s. They will be a worst to best wilderness years stories instead. So that's the plan. I think I may have explained that in the 60s ranking video though. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time, which should be for Shada. And then on to season 17's ranking, and then season 18 begins. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Nicholas Payne Retro YouTube channel. Let's get down to the 4th Doctor. Sorry, we're pretty much ranking. We're going to be, I was about to say 12 for some reason, and the dishonourable mention also. I was about to say 12. From season 16, I should know that. From season 16, it is the Android Invasion. No, it's not. Excuse me. If you saw the season 16, which came out recent, yeah, a lot of, you expect season 13 to pop up. Yeah, originally all of season 13 were candidates for this list, apart from Plans of Evil, which was only a candidate for the dishonourable mention. Yeah, all of season 13 with Sutek, Mas. So, yeah, and Spear from Space is just a great way to kickstart the 70s as a whole, as well as the 3rd Doctor's era. So not only does Spear from Space kickstart the 7th season off with a bang, but it also kickstarts the 3rd. Just try not to get too annoyed with the third Doctor. Okay. 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 And that, I think I've covered how many season 8? I think I've covered 3 seasons. Cut that last bit. Cut the stuff about season 8. Number 4 is a story that is whilst Jack McCulloch's favourite story of all time is my 4th place of Jack's favourite story is currently but Bernard Hobson's as he's in Davros, that's why I'm talking. And some expanded media, including the audios that's here. And I think this particularly imparts through That's You, but Kablam's a 12. Not Kablam. Whilst here, not as much because okay, moving on to number 2. Number 2 is a story from. Hang on, I forgot. Did I say it's from season 12? If I didn't, I'm going to say it now. And one story that is still in my top 10 favorites. If Terrence Dicks can leave on one of his own. Hey, if Terrence Dicks can. In which case, neither of those no, that doesn't work. But and number 1 is my favourite. So yeah, that's why I consider it the best of the 1970s.